All right, I think we'll get going. I'm Richard Tollefson with the Phoenix Philanthropy Group. Thanks everyone for joining us. We have a group of about 30 right now, 75 RSVP'd who are, past and current clients of the Phoenix Philanthropy Group, friends and colleagues, and we are excited that you are joining our webinar series today. We have a number of webinars that are available to you. You'll be able to click through from our website, but also go directly to YouTube and Google Phoenix Philanthropy on YouTube, and you'll find other webinars that we've done. We do these generally every 6 to 8 weeks on different topics that are important to our clients and others, so they're timely and relevant topics. Today, we're going to be talking about capacity, propensity, and readiness, and we have a team of 4 who will be talking about that. Myself, Richard Tollefson, my background is that I started Phoenix Philanthropy Group about 16 years ago. Before that, most of my career was in higher education at the Thunderbird School of Global Management, Arizona State University and University of Arizona. Cheryl, who is a consultant with Phoenix Philanthropy, her career was at University of Arizona and Pima Community Colleges Foundation, as well as Junior Achievement before she joined the Phoenix Philanthropy Group. Whitney Fulton, who's also a consultant with the Phoenix Philanthropy Group, worked with me for a long time at the Thunderbird School of Global Management, and ultimately became the Vice President of Institutional Advancement at the Thunderbird School of Global Management before joining the Phoenix Philanthropy Group. And our featured special guest is Diane Abraham, who's a longtime friend and client of ours and currently is the Senior Vice President of University Advancement at Western University of Health Sciences. And Diane's great career has been involved in higher education, in healthcare, and in community philanthropy with community foundations in the Midwest. So we're excited to have this team together to talk about capacity, propensity, and readiness. And the objectives for today's discussion are to give you some tools and tips to be able to identify key prospects, to understand that capacity, propensity, and readiness and qualifying prospects is both an art and a science. And then how do you move toward those cultivation and solicitation activities that will help you ultimately realize a strong potential, high potential gift from your prospects and donors. So while we're talking about capacity, propensity, and readiness, we're also talking again about the art and science that goes into this, because Whitney particularly will talk about some of the tools that are critically important to success in fundraising and in determining capacity, propensity, and readiness. But we'll also talk to you about some of the intuition and the ways that you will have conversations and dialogues with your prospects and donors. And the science, again, the tools, the resources, the software, the art is the fun part. That's where you get to know who your prospects and donors are and really help them to fulfill their goals and their mission overall. So we want to look at a couple of the fundamentals that provide a strong framework for capacity, propensity, and readiness work. And first is the comprehensive fundraising operation, and Amy is going to pull that up. When you look at capacity, propensity, and readiness, we're doing this in the context of a comprehensive fundraising operation. And that means that you can work with it, that concept of capacity, propensity, and readiness at all different levels of the pyramid. That may be annual fund and special events all the way up to transformational giving. But the reason that we look at this is really to move those prospects and donors that we have up from the lower level giving to that giving of the highest potential and capacity giving for our prospects and donors. So at that top of the pyramid, it may be 80-20, it may be 90-10, it may be 95-5 in terms of the percentage of donors who give overall toward a campaign or an annual appeal. But again, our goal is to move our prospects and donors up this pyramid so that we are moving toward capacity gifts. And capacity, propensity, and readiness is something that we look at all stages of the relationship management cycle. As we look at that, it's not just with discovery, and it's not just, could you flip, Amy, please? Oh, I'm not seeing it here. I'm still there. There I are. There we are. Okay. It's not just at the discovery and qualification stage that we look at capacity, propensity, and readiness. It's all through the relationship management cycle. because we're always trying to make sure that we're qualifying our prospects in a way, again, that brings them to the capacity gift or to that gift that most realizes their potential. And it's also, we know that relationship management, we want to look at long-term mutually beneficial relationship management. We want to look at meaningful engagement. And again, as fundraisers, our bottom line is to look at the amount of money that we're going to bring in and to optimize giving of our prospects and donors. But it's optimizing that engagement with the institution in a meaningful way that makes sense for your prospects and donors for the institution, that's going to be at the foundation of a strong relationship. So why do people give? People give because of issues of the head and the heart. In terms of the head, that will be the numbers, the details, the impact that they'll want reporting on. And in terms of the heart, that is more about lives touched and impact on individual lives. And it also works with kind of that intuition. So as we are development officers looking at those who think with their head, that want the numbers, those who think with the heart, so too is that the way we need to look at how we look at capacity, propensity, and readiness. So it's an art and a science. We look at research, we look at experience, and we look at intuition. So research, again, the software systems that we use, it's research, it's screening, it's analytics, it's data mining, it's projections, it's profiling. In terms of experience, that is the relationship that your prospect and donor has had with your organization over a long period of time. And that experience is also where you get to know most about your prospect and donor. And again, as I said at the beginning, that's the fun part. The fun part is when you can find out about what their history is, or their profession, how many kids do they have, what do they do in their life, what are their hobbies. That helps you make sure that the experience that you bring to and offer your prospect and donor is the very best one. And you're aligning their mission, vision, and values with that of the organization. And you are really looking to optimize those relationships in ways that are the most fulfilling for your prospect and donor and allow them to help accomplish and achieve their dreams. And then intuition, that is just taking all of the data that we have, taking the experience that one has with the organization, their giving history, their level of engagement with the organization, and then adding some good intuition to it to make a decision. Are they ready to be asked for a gift? What size should that gift be? When do we ask? Who's in the room when we ask? All those kind of key decisions and key points that are so important to optimizing a gift. And that all comes together, again, with both the science and the art of fundraising and capacity, propensity, and readiness. So just a few stats from Giving USA, which many of you already know, but 87.5% of giving in the United States is from individuals when you combine individuals, their family foundations, and their bequests. And so as you were looking at where your greatest potential is in going forward, ultimately, it will be about individuals. Each institution's a little bit different. The balance that you have between individual giving, corporate and foundation giving may be different, and it is different in different types of institutions, but ultimately, individual giving overall is 87% of total giving. And then where does that money go? It goes to a number of different sectors, which we all know from, again, the Giving USA report. And a key takeaway from this slide that I like to talk about is that don't think your organization is only in one part of this pie. You may be an educational institution who also, advises on issues of human services or health and well-being or environment and the animals. So a lot of institutions really fit in a number of different areas. So when Whitney talks about prospect research, particularly institutional prospect research, you can look beyond just the strict area that you might consider yourself in, consider your organization in, to look beyond that. And so before I turn it over to Cheryl, just last comments in terms of why people give. People may give because of recognition, but they also give because they want to meet basic community and individual needs. They want to give back to society because they have been very gifted and have benefited from society around them. They want to improve someone's lives or a group of people's lives. They're emotionally moved by a story of a community or an individual. They want to have impact and result, and really how we measure that impact, both in terms of the head and the heart, the numbers and the stories, is really important. It's important to our case for support. It's important for our annual reports. It's important for our impact reports and the conversations that we have with our prospects and donors. And then finally, to make the world a better place. And obviously, it's because they were asked to. And when they're asked, capacity, propensity, and readiness really helps us to determine not why people give, but how they give. How they give, how much they can give, what are they giving for, and when is the most appropriate time for them to give. So I'll turn it over to Cheryl, who's going to walk us through some steps of capacity, propensity, and readiness.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you all for joining us today. Before we get into some of the nitty-gritty details of tools and case studies and techniques that you might use to determine capacity, propensity, and readiness, we'll start with talking about just a few definitions and looking at some of the factors that you will be looking at to determine the likelihood of a prospect or donor making a gift to your organization. So in broad terms, capacity refers to how much they can give, propensity refers to how philanthropic they are, and readiness refers to how connected they are to your organization. After this webinar, we'll be sending out this PowerPoint as well as a few handouts that you can use to refer to, including this one on assessing capacity, propensity, and readiness. And anytime you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be having some time for discussion and questions throughout the end of the presentation. So let's talk about capacity. How much are people worth and how much can they give? There's a lot of factors that go into someone's ability to make a gift. Their net worth, their financial obligations, their age, their lifestyle, all of those kinds of things. A lot of capacity can be determined through some screening techniques, again, that Whitney will share with you a little bit later. Looking at what their estimated net worth is, what's their primary source of income, how much is their real estate valued. There are a lot of public sources that I'm sure you're familiar with and that you have used before that determine how or give you an idea of what someone's capacity to make a gift are. But then there are some other areas, as Richard said, that really touch on the art of fundraising rather than just the science. And that really involves getting to know the prospect or donor and understanding what their life situation is. How old are they? Are they younger and have a growing family? Are they older and perhaps are a good candidate for a planned or legacy gift? What is their family situation? Do they have children in college, so they have a big financial obligation there? Are they a caregiver for elderly parents or someone else in their family that might take some of their income? And what is their personal health status? There may be some health considerations that come into play with their ability to make a gift to your organization. There are some extraordinary circumstances that may impact capacity, and things that you find by reading the newspaper. Someone sells a business, someone becomes a major stockholder in a publicly traded company. And then there are some other things that you might find out through doing some peer screening with your board members or other volunteers. Have they recently gone through a life change, such as a divorce, or conversely gotten married, things that might affect their capacity to make gifts. So all of these factors come into play when you're looking at if someone is at a level that they can make a major gift to your organization, and start to look at what that major gift level might be. So once we have an idea of capacity, we can then turn to propensity. Propensity determines whether or not a prospect or donor's interests, values align with your organization's mission and their programs. Do they support similar organizations to yours? Or are they just generally philanthropic? Unfortunately, someone can have all the capacity in the world, but not have a philanthropic bone in their body. And so they're not really a good candidate for giving to your organization. But again, in looking through some of the donor profiles, doing some electronic screening, you can determine if they have given to other organizations, what their philanthropic propensity is. Do they have a donor advised fund at a community foundation? Do they have a family foundation? All of these kinds of things can be found through some basic research. But again, working with your volunteers and your board members to do some peer screening is often the best way to find out what someone's propensity might be. Learning if someone serves on a board with someone that you know, if they have been a major donor to a similar organization, and if they have a shared passion for your organization. Someone who has given to an environmental organization may be more likely to support other environmental causes down the road. And so it's good to be able to look at those. And of course, when you're looking at propensity, the best people to look at are the people that have already been giving to your organization. Perhaps those longtime annual fund donors who are giving every year and have expressed an interest in your organization and may have the potential to move up that fundraising pyramid, as Richard described earlier. And so that brings us to readiness. How do you determine if a prospect has been meaningfully engaged enough with your organization to be able to make that major or planned gift? It's understanding where they are in their relationship with the organization and then taking the steps that are necessary to move them closer if that is what needs to happen. So have they been meaningfully communicated with your organization? Have they had some engagement with your organization? Has that engagement been positive or negative? And are there things that you might need to do to be able to bring them a little bit closer? And if they've had some problems with your organization, how can you resolve those? And finally, who in your organization might be the best people to work with them and to influence them? The development director is often the quarterback of the relationship, looking at who might have the most influence and the most ability to bring someone closer to your organization. It may be a board member, it may be an executive staff member, it may be a program manager, but really looking at the ways that someone might be influenced and brought closer to your organization to get them to that point where they are ready to make that major gift. And so now I am going to reintroduce Diane Abraham, Senior Vice President for University Advancement for Western University of Health Sciences, who is going to talk about putting some of these factors of capacity, propensity, and readiness into action. So Diane, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. I am really happy to share a few successful stories of how we at Western U did identify a couple key prospects and we moved them along the process to secure a major gift. It's what you were talking about, Cheryl. It's about the art and science and putting those pieces together. And in my experience, the key prospects that you're trying to identify are all around you. They're in teaching in your classroom, they're in your boardroom, they're in your volunteer committees, they're your grateful patients, they're your alums. It's just about really looking around to find where they are and find out who really cares about your work. So I have 3 examples to kind of illustrate that. The first one is an alum of our institution, and then the second one is a staff member, and the last one is a special friend of a board member. In this example, this is a really touching story. Gene is here with his lovely wife. They came from Haiti to the United States. And on the way to the United States, they stopped in Mexico and got a medical degree. That wasn't good enough in the United States. So Gene found Western University of Health Sciences and became a graduate of the PA program, a physician assistant. He was very grateful for that experience because it allowed him to open up an urgent care clinic. Now, between the time he graduated and we identified him as a prospect, there's like 17 years there. And how did we find him? Well, we decided in 2019 that we were going to change up our alumni events. We were going to do targeted alumni mixers and try to bring our alumni closer in an intimate way. It worked. He came to the event. He met the new president, he met the leadership team, he had conversations with his classmates. He got re-engaged at a deeper level. So then us in the development shop decided, well, we're going to follow up. We're going to learn more about him. We learned about, through research, his urgent care clinic, and we set up a tour. We called him and said, we would really love to tour your facility. Can we come see you and talk to you about that? What we did is, in the tour, he got all excited. We learned about his passion. We learned how he got there. And he kept saying, if it wasn't for Western U, I wouldn't have this, because of Western U. So we knew that he had a heart and he cared about our organization. So in the process, we did a couple, what we call qualifying visits. And then we came back with an idea how he could help students like him. And it was a scholarship. It was an endowed scholarship. He didn't want an annual scholarship. He wanted one to go on forever. So he did that within less than a year of us identifying him as a prospect. And then it was a matter of a couple months later, he was so excited about this gift that he signed a bequest to even help more students. So this was an example of bringing an alum that was not really engaged for 17 years with our organization, except a few gifts, and bringing him to campus, bringing him, go visit him on his property, and also bring him together with his classmates. It was a beautiful way for us to really engage him, and he is still thinking of maybe a capital gift when we launch the next campaign. So that is one example. My second example is an example of a staff member. Bob became engaged with Western U through a different way. He was working in a corporation that did sponsor commencement in 2013. Then he retired. He said, I don't want to sit at home. I still want to give back. I love this field. I really like what's going on at Western U. When I was there for commencement, he sat down with the dean and said, how can I help? What can I do? He became a part-time staff member, and he helped with the graduate career placement. The dean kept talking to him and engaging him. And in a short period of time, in 2 years, his wife passed away, and he was very obviously devastated, but wanted to do something in her memory. The dean was right there to say, well, maybe you want to do something for education, for our students. Again, this is where the dean called us, the development shop, and said, I think we have a donor here, a prospect that's ready to give at a different level. Here again, we sat down with him a couple times, learned about what he was about, learned about his family, learned about what he was passionate, what Western U did well for the College of Optometry, what we didn't do well. And then we did agree on a gift again for a scholarship. He wanted to do it in memory of his wife, who was very focused and very passionate about education. So we did that. And for about 4 or 5 years, we started cultivating, we started stewarding the gift, making sure he met his scholarship recipient, had time with them, brought him back to campus, invited him to events, kept, giving him impact reports. And then when his life settled down, his life changed again, the state settled, his family was comfortable, he decided to increase his gift to the endowment upon his death. And again, this was just a beautiful way that we brought him in to help share his talent and his time that led to him sharing his treasure with the university. So again, a great example of somebody that's right in your backyard, really close to you. You just have to find out who they are. And my last example is my favorite one of all. In fact, this donor is one of my favorites of all my careers. And it really illustrates how it takes time in building the relationship, and all the pieces Cheryl talked about have to come together to make these type of gifts. This engagement with this donor and the family began with a trustee. It was one of the founding trustees that happened to be friends with the donor. And they were family friends. So, this family would meet with that family and have these intriguing, interesting conversations around the dinner table about research, about neuroscience, about, he was in pathology, all these very intriguing conversations. And the family got interested in what was going on at Western U. They were intrigued with the work that they were trying to do. This led the board, the trustee, to talk to the deans, to talk to the president, to bring everybody together to introduce this donor to Western U. Quickly led to, as you can see, what they were passionate about. 2 endowed professorships, research fund, and in a short period of time, the largest pledged gift in the history, at least at 2008. And here is where, there's our challenges with some of these gifts. And Cheryl talked about that. Life changes, family changes, businesses change, there are marriages, there are divorces, there are weddings, there are funerals, all these things happen in this family. So with their pledge, they only fulfilled part of it shortly after they made the pledge. In the meantime, we did develop a plan that how we were going to steward and cultivate this family to fulfill that pledge and possibly move them up the pyramid to make a transformational gift. The ways we did that is we made sure the family was invited to all the tours, the lectures on campus. I included them in events to sit at my table, to be my guest, to highlight them. And I made personal visits throughout the period of time to check on them, to see how they were doing. And talk about readiness. This just happened in the last year. Who would have thought in COVID? In COVID, the family had made some different changes in their financial picture. They were ready. They were ready to fulfill this pledge. And now we're at the stage of not only fulfilling the pledge that was made many years ago, but we're also ready to incorporate the whole family. The greater family wants to participate in the family philanthropy that their mother and father started. And it's just really exciting to get to know all the people in their family and how to work with them and how to engage them. So our next step again is to do all the work we did before, bring them back on campus, have them tour the place, get to know the new leadership, have meetings with the deans that they want to work with. So again, that one illustrates that sometimes you just have to take time and be patient and stay closely engaged with your donors and prospects so you know what they're about, what they're going through, and what means the most to them. So the only person that always would challenge me on this is the CFO. Every year, since I've been here, are you sure we're going to get that gift? What do we need to do with that pledge? And I said, the family still intends to complete the pledge. Please just be patient. So at the end of the day, it's again been another story that illustrates the art and science of making those connections, finding those prospects, bringing those prospects closer to your organization, and knowing when the right time is to ask them for money and ask them for help. So with that, I think, Richard, you were going to ask me a couple questions about my experiences.
First, I wanted to restate, I think, a couple of key points that directly deal with our topic, but also deal with some best practices in fundraising. With Gene, he hadn't been involved in the university for 17 years, but he came to an event. And the key point was your individualized follow-up from that event. It's not just about throwing a great party. It's not just about maybe even raising money at an event. It is about the personalized follow-up with those people who you may or may not know have high potential, but opening that door to continued engagement. With Bob, oftentimes we may have board members or donors who give through their corporations. You said Bob was involved with sponsorship. You weren't really looking at him as an individual prospect, but he kind of opened that door to you. So thinking in terms of our corporate donors and in the CEOs or others who are representing those corporations with your institution, that they may want to be involved in as an individual. Same, he then became an employee. And oftentimes we don't look in our own backyard. We don't look at our employee base. We don't look at our volunteer base. And I think that is really important as well. And then with Anonymous, there's a lot of great things to talk about there, but particularly in terms of the patience that you had with regard to pledge fulfillment. And you obviously assumed the positive. You assumed that they were going to make this. There were temporary, issues that caused them to have to take a bit of a different direction, but you were able to put administration at bay a bit and, continue to build that relationship. And that person gave again and again and again in a way, and the family gave again and again and again in a way that obviously, helped to keep fulfilling their philanthropic goals, their philanthropic dreams with an institution that they cared a lot about. So that's just a reiteration of some key points that I think from your discussion. But, as you're talking to these people, as you're getting to know these people, what are some of the kind of key questions that you ask them? They all came to you in slightly different ways. Their profiles are all different, but how do you have that conversation that advances your knowledge of their capacity, propensity, and readiness, and their engagement with the university?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I always teach my development staff that this is the art part, right? We take the research profiles that we know some of the data and the information about the family. We know the key people, we know how old they are. We go to these meetings having a lot of knowledge of what they're about. But I don't start with what we're about, Western U is about. I always ask those open-ended questions that get at the heart of who they are, what's important to them. Like with Jean, how did you get here? Look at this beautiful clinic you built. Now, how did that happen? What was involved in that? So I ask them about that, who's important to them. And then, as that conversation goes on and you do probing questions after that and confirm the information you think I start asking them, well, why are you giving to Western U? Or in Jean's case, what prompted you to come to the alumni event? Why did you want to come? What was good about that event? What would you like to see us do differently? And then, I always circle back as, tell me more about your experience at Western U. So those are the always open-ended questions. And I find this is the part that's so fun with your donors. This is the fun part, getting to know them, right? And so I always tell my team, it's all about them. Find about them, and there's a lot of joy in that. So I hope that answered the question, because I tailor the questions to each visit and each person.
But the key point is that you put them first, and you're first finding out about them in a way that, yes, ultimately you want to align to Western, but it may come in a different path. It may not be established, frankly, but you're putting them first, understanding who they are, their mission, vision, and values, and aligning it with the institution.
Absolutely.
I had a case once where, and Whitney will remember this from our Thunderbird days, but we had been pursuing this prospect for years, literally. He was an icon of Wall Street. We knew his capacity was absolutely enormous. And I've been trying to get in front of him for probably 3 or 4 years. Finally, he took a meeting. He said, you have 20 minutes, blah, blah, blah. So, and I, started off with, well, your career success has been immense. Thank you for allowing us to be here. The room around you indicates your success. How did Thunderbird fit into your success? And he said, well, Richard, if you did your research on me, you will know that I was also a graduate of Wharton and Harvard. And Thunderbird had nothing to do with my career success. He goes, but it had everything to do with my success in life. And so it was all about the personal. It had nothing to do with the business degree. It was all about the personal. So we thought we were completely distracted here, but we were able to come back and talk about his personal engagement with the students and what it meant to him, when he was a student. And he became a very generous donor to the institution in a completely different way. But if we had only gone in and asked about business and targeted business and didn't listen first, we would have been completely on the wrong path. All right, Whitney, let's turn it over to you, Whitney, who's going to tell us about some tools and tricks to find out more about our prospects.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm very excited to talk about the research portion. We won't go into a great amount of detail, but I hope that some of these examples will help you be a little more efficient in how you search. So the first slide is just an overview of some of the more basic research tools that we provide our clients. And it really just kind of highlights just the benefits of a quick 15-minute search right before you go into a meeting. If you don't have somebody on staff, or if you hadn't been able to prepare some research, I mean, just a quick Google search will help you. Just the name, or anything you just kind of quickly glean. And then there's a couple of more options there that have some of the assessments for the personal property, philanthropic interest, political donations. So that's just a quick checklist that we kind of provide our clients. But the next slide, I'm going to go into 4 different examples of the very cool, and yet I feel it's one of the most underutilized ways of searching Google, and it's using Google's advanced search tech, the search operators. So we know typically, most people I know at least know the and and the or and the quotations, so that you make sure you get a certain phrase. But one of the things that I really do try to highlight is that there's so many more options, so many things you can do with this. So I want to take today and kind of just go over a couple of them. So the first one is using the examples, if you want to find board bios or executives within a corporation, their bios, or just bio information on anyone. As you can see here in the snapshot, I use specifically file type PDF, or file type of DOC, which is a Word document. PDF is a PDF document, or DOCX. And the reason I use DOC or DOCX is because if you have an older version of Word, it's a DOC. If you have the newer version of Word, it's a DOCX. But this way, Google knows to search only for specific, bios that are one of these file types. And then, of course, after that, I just put keywords. So executive bios or board candidate bios. And the list could go on and on. I could put 27 search terms, or say or. I think you kind of get the idea. But as you can see, like just from putting that, the first results I get are Glenn Williams, Napa Technology. As you can see, it provides you a real quick way to be able to get at an executive bio. And if you know the company you're actually looking for, there's a way you can actually search the website as well. So for example, if I want to go to Microsoft, I could have put site:/Microsoft.com. So these will be part of, though, we talked about giving some handouts after this. I'm going to provide a whole suite of options that you can have with a lot more examples. So you don't, furiously take notes if you are, but I will provide you a lot more in-depth examples. Just wanted to kind of give you an idea. So that's the first example. And the second one is the donor giving. So you can perform a bunch of searches related specifically to the giving of, whether it's university, hospital, actually anywhere. Again, if you look at that screenshot, put donates, and then as you'll see, I put a asterisk for million, and then quotes university, or donated asterisk million university. The asterisk replaces, like if I didn't know if somebody gave 6 million, 2 million, the asterisk actually replaces that value. So it'll give me anything within that realm. So as you can see here, right there, Eastern Michigan, Charles Hoskins. So this is actually a really cool way. Again, you can put any words, anything that you want in these searches, and this is what you'll get. So it's super, it's amazing to me because it's free, it's very robust, and everybody has access to this. So it's another way you can search it. So example 3 is using it for grant opportunities. So based on the websites, kind of what I talked about with Microsoft. So as you'll see here, I use the site, and then again, I put the asterisk and then .org, because most of the foundations have a .org website. They don't have a .com. So it's my way of telling Google, just show me the orgs, and then in text. So this is also a kind of a new one that I know not a lot of people use, but in text mean within that website at any point in time, show me, I want capacity building within that .org website and submission deadline. So it shows you right there, engagement award, capacity building, October 21 cycle. So while this is a very broad search, it's, you can put in, again, any terms, and this will at least help you kind of eliminate some of those, superfluous other, results that you get back. Because sometimes when you do some of the searching, as you know, you can get back thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. This really does help you to kind of hone it down a little bit more. And then the last example is really using research resources. So I could come up here and tell you a whole bunch of them, but you can also, I'm empowering you to do it yourself as well. So using that file type that we talked about, so file type PDF or file type of DOC, which is a Word document, or file type DOCX, in text, again, within that webs, anything with that has a extension of that file type, and then in text prospect research resources, as you'll see there. So 915. And these are going to be, again, very highly relevant matches. You'll see useful website databases, international prospect research resources. So again, I think you can kind of see how you use these to be able to, based on what you're looking for, really make these searches far more efficient, but also this allows you to really very much be able to truly like hone in on those really relevant topics and really timely. Because one of the things I did not go into here, but will be in the handout, is if you'll see on that right hand side in that screenshot, it has tools. Even within that tools section of Google, you can limit the date range. You can limit also other areas. So they'll get more into that, because I could actually literally spend, I'm sure, hours and hours and hours going over all the different ways. But it really, I just wanted to show you kind of just quickly how easy it is to kind of use Google as a far more of a powerhouse search resource than just typing a name in. So that is my contribution here.
Well, that's terrific. And I have to tell you, I looked at Whitney's slides ahead of time and I looked in the wrong place. I mean, it's up there in the search area that is the key to what you were talking about, not the resources below. So when we send you the PowerPoint back out and Whitney sends you the resources, look up there, because that's, the driver to get more in-depth information. And Whitney is she can find out anything about anyone, which is quite amazing. And it's always interesting to find out the new tricks of the trade that she uses, which are frequently changing. In terms of Whitney, I want to talk about a couple of other tools that we often use and their utility and how somebody should best use them. People do well screening all the time. And well screening is one of many tools that we really can look at in determining capacity, propensity, readiness, particularly the capacity and propensity. But oftentimes those wealth screening profiles are inaccurate, or they don't have a full picture of somebody. And when you're working with volunteer leaders or CEOs or even chief development officers who might not completely understand how to interpret that data and how to read between the lines, what are some key points that you have in that? Because it's easy to discount the utility of that information, even though it's very helpful, even though it may not be complete.
Right. So we actually partner with Donor Search for a lot of our well screening, because it does focus a lot on the philanthropic giving, which in our line of work, it's actually most helpful, because that helps you in determining really the ask amount that we know has far greater chance of being accurate than some of the other ones. But it is just that. It is just a tool really to help us somewhat have a starting point in terms of what that capacity is, and for both assets and for philanthropic giving. While there is a whole host of information out there available on the public, internet, we do realize that donors are far more sophisticated than ever before. So they have it in trust. They have a whole way of not necessarily hiding their wealth, but just being a little more sophisticated in how they're actually putting that out there. And they also are well aware of how people are able to search for some other assets as well. So what we typically do is we do a profile, which will give us an idea of stock holdings, of property holdings, again, all things that are available on the public internet. And we then kind of just walk through with our client, looking at the different, areas. And a lot of the inaccurate information comes from the like a credit profile. So like Martz and Lundy, a lot of like even Ben's Willie Flessner, they have like these lifestyle ratings or lifestyle indicators. And it's based on credit card utilization and a couple of other things, but that's really where we see a lot of more inaccurate information. So we really try to steer clients saying, all right, this donor probably better than we do, but just let us know. And we can also, one of the great things is now with wealth screening, you can actually go back and typically alter that profile so that as you start to put in different information, it actually will update dynamically to then either change their wealth, their ask amount based on the philanthropic giving or their asset amount. So that's very cool. But it's really just a way to start having that dialogue. And it's just more of a way to add to your already existing, what you may have in your database, but also again, through peer screening, like Diane talked about, it's really important to just use it as one piece of the much larger puzzle as it relates specifically to crafting that strategy. So
we often talk about these pieces of the puzzle and, see if these are the right pieces and then give me what percentage you would look at these in weighting as you're determining capacity, propensity, and readiness. We look at good in-depth prospect research, screening, the wealth screening that we've just discussed, peer screening. It may be their history, and that largely comes from your database. The history of engagement, history of giving, patterns, issues, trends that you can find in there. And then frankly, the conversation with the prospect or donor. How do you weight those in terms of importance in creating the appropriate profile of your prospect or donor?
So if it's somebody already existing in your system, I would utilize all the internal resources first and foremost, and then complement with anything else outside of that. So whether that's going again through the research data, your own internal database, and then maybe the peer screening, and then your external screenings or external research resources. If it's somebody that maybe a board member has given you, it's not in your system, then I would actually typically start with a wealth screening profile. And that gives me an indication as to kind of where I can maybe go, because that'll often indicate to me as well that there could be an existing relationship within the internal structure of where the entity, the organization. So that gives me a little bit better idea of where to go from there. If it's just a name though, I just happen to find somewhere, or it comes to me, it's always best to really, I start with a Google search first, and then I normally do a wealth screening profile from there. And then that kind of dictates the path forward after that. It really, to me, the best information truly comes from what's already in your system, but really your volunteer, folks, whether it's your board, if you have a task force, if you have leadership, whoever is closest to that entity, those really are it's the best information truly, because as we know too, even with the artificial intelligence, the machine learning, the deep learning, those do help a great deal, but it's really nothing quite like having that dialogue. And then that will open doors to a lot of other linkages or relationships that you did not even, you hadn't even been thinking of. So it just kind of broadens and deepens that whole, potential prospect, I guess, pool, so of candidates. So to me, that's kind of how I would start.
Well, I think that's great because, we can do all of the research, we can do all of the screening, but something can happen between the time of the research and you're walking in their office door, or you're walking into their living room, and it is their, friends, their peers, their colleagues that are going to know if there's been a life-changing situation or their interests are going in a different direction. And that's pretty key. Mm-hmm. So Diane, as a fundraising professional, how, best do you work with people like Whitney, who's the research brainiac? And, how do you, work with them in ways that you get the most benefit out of it? And then where do you have challenges when you're trying to interpret the data that's in front of you? So how do you break that down and most effectively use that?
Okay, that's a two-part question. So let me start with, I always think of development shops as the front office and the back office, right? And the back office is the brain trust, as much information as we can get to enable the frontline staff to do their work. So how I always use research and prospect researchers is I put them at the table anytime I can, at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the whole donor cycle, right? So, you know, it could be like Whitney said, you identified a prospect that we hadn't thought about. And so we bring you in at the development meetings, at the campaign meetings, at the leadership meetings. You're always present at the table, whether you have, you know, very vocal role or not, but you're absorbing the conversations that we are having so you can better go inform us. I also like to use the prospect research team to be deeply engaged with the development officers. So they meet with them one-on-one, because you're talking about that dialogue that the development officers bring to the information, and it would give the researcher an area to go look. For example, Gene is going to sell his clinic soon, but I would tell the researcher that to help find out, you know, what that looks like, be on a watch for it, what's going on. So I also do that very, very intimately, keep them involved at all times in everything. What was your second part of the question? Remind me, Richard.
In what challenges do you have, you or your development officers have with taking the data that you know, the research team may have and really putting it into action? Where do you have some challenges with that?
I have challenges with the lack, sometimes the lack of accurate data, like you had talked about, especially when we have the wealthier prospects. We don't get a full picture of what their capacity is, because like you said, they may have not hidden, but we're not aware of them. So, and we also sometimes miss with those larger donors with their gifts, they're anonymous. You're not going to find them anywhere. So you won't have that data to go into the cultivation phase knowing what it is. So that's where it's a little bit trickier and we have a little bit more difficulty understanding that. What we understand well is when you update and do the wealth screening, you know, those ranges, what the targeted major gift range is, what their planned giving propensity is, those seem to be pretty right on. I mean, we don't have trouble understanding that, and it gives us a starting point when we make a proposal or an ask. So again, here is just building that relationship with the researcher, making sure that they're always on the lookout for who you're going to talk to. So a week before we go visit a donor, we send our request to the researcher and say, is there anything new we're missing? You know, any Google alerts, anything. So we are on top of as much as we can be and knowing what's going on with that donor and family.
So I think you kind of answered this question. We have a question from the group. Do you use a CPR scoring system to prioritize your work?
We do.
And it kind of sounds like that's what you just described.
We do. It does guide our work.
And I think Cheryl and Whitney and I were just discussing this today with regard to a client where, you know, we use capacity, propensity, and readiness to prioritize the work and the assignments to development officers. But you want to take that information and slice it and dice it in a number of different ways. So when you're sitting down for strategy meetings about the prospects, don't always look at like Diane's portfolio from the largest capacity down. Look at it in terms of Diane's portfolio and, you know, who knows the chairman of the board, you know, who has the potential to give by calendar year end, who's a couple of years out, you know, who's more interested in this program versus that, where this one's having an anniversary. So the prioritization that can come of it and the rating and the ranking of your prospects is key, but don't just get stuck in one way of interpreting it. Always look at it through a different lens and literally sort your prospect tracking lists and your prospect lists in different ways so you can see it again through those different lenses each time. Whitney, then I'm going to ask you the reverse question of Diane is, you know, when you're working with frontline fundraisers, what do you say is the most critical information for them to take first and foremost? And maybe it goes back to the internal data first, but what do you think is the most important first data to look at? And if there are some misunderstandings about the role of prospect research and screening, by frontline fundraisers, what is it?
So the most important information I would typically tell clients to review would be, again, the internal profile first and foremost, but really focus in on any key notes. So a lot of times in systems, I will see relational notes, or that they have the little relationship tree if you have Razor's Edge. So there are some key pieces that I feel like they're mostly user-defined fields within the system that they need to make sure that they're notes or miscellaneous. Sometimes they're just not exactly tagged or titled appropriately, but I do feel like having a profile that has been most likely set up by a research individual, just making sure that they really review that. In terms of any misperceived notions or anything that, like, in terms of what the role for research is, I mean, I will say one of my more frustrating times when I started out in research was individuals thinking they had to have everything and anything, like a full blown out profile before they even would talk to someone. We just don't have time and luxury to do that. So I think that still happens quite a bit, actually. People still want everything and anything they can get before they'll even have this dialogue. But in my mind, if a researcher is bringing a prospect to you, they've already done that initial discovery, and this looks like a great prospect. So they just need you to go out and really kind of determine that propensity, as we talked about, because that's the hardest part, is really figuring out the propensity. And that is really, you have to have that dialogue. You have to begin that relationship in order to really accurately assess that. So I think that's probably really the only at least challenges that I know that I've really kind of seen, is just the thought that you have to have everything before you have this dialogue, but also knowing having an understanding and flexibility to know that these profiles and that what we have been able to get from the internet, while we think they are as accurate as they can be, there will be some inaccurate information, but to also make sure to come back and let researchers know that and close that cycle. So I think it's sometimes we're left hanging a little bit, like, well, what happened? What's going on? And, so just kind of looping back to the researcher, that's really helpful for them as well. So
Great.
We only have about 2 minutes left, but I think we have time for one more question that came in from the group. How much of a development department's resources, primarily staff, would you recommend putting towards CPR, and consider a department that is very small? Anybody have any suggestions for staff time?
to me, I would say 25%. If you can, I think that, I mean, it's a little aggressive, but there's a lot of prospects to kind of go through. And I do think having somebody help with that, at least the capacity piece, propensity to the degree that they're able to, I think that would actually go a long way in terms of making sure you're going through your site, getting new prospects in that pipeline. That's my thought.
In my experience, we didn't quite go that aggressively, but when we needed to identify new prospects, we hired externally to bring that research in to help us, because we couldn't afford it, especially with the smaller shops. You just couldn't afford to have it. You needed it, but you had to outsource it.
And I think it also helps you to prioritize your existing donor base. It's not just about new prospect development, but with your existing donors and optimizing those donors, having 25% plus or minus where you're doing this type of research and screening and review is going to be pretty critically important. And it's ultimately going to make more efficient use of your time, because you're going to focus in on those prospects and donors who have the greatest potential.
So on that note, I think we are at time. I will thank Diane and Whitney and Richard for joining us today, and especially thank all of you for tuning in. You will be receiving, again, the PowerPoint and the handouts via email, and you'll be able to view this or share it on our YouTube channel. And if any questions came up that we didn't get to, please feel free to reach out to any of us at any time. So thank you all. Have a great day, and best of luck to you.